A torchlight procession in Leeds. Local people have turned out in support of a young Indian woman and her son who are threatened with deportation. The demonstration is part of a growing public concern that the Home Office now holds powers unique in British law. A person may be arrested, locked up, and later removed from Britain on the word of an immigration official. Once arrested, there's no trial, no right to bail, and no right of appeal in this country. This family is waiting for a flight to take them back to the Philippines. Linda and Freddie Albacer have lived in Britain for 8 years. Now an immigration official stands by to supervise their removal.
These are your tickets.
Tonight, World in Action reports on the Home Office policy developed in the last 5 years that has led to the deportation or removal of hundreds of people who thought they were legally settled here.
The rate of removals have increased during the last 2 years, and the situation was very worrying under the previous Labour administration and continues to be quite alarming now. The rate of removals is now running at the rate of something like 200 per quarter. That's risen by something over 50% in the last 2 years.
Anyway, Sally, when you are ready.
For the Albacers, it means facing a future of poverty and uncertainty in the Philippines and leaving behind the home they've made for themselves in this country.
Hello, JCWI.
The London offices of the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. It's an independent organisation offering help and advice to immigrants on all kinds of problems. They're concerned at the effect of Home Office policy. The JCWI's director, Ian Martin.
When you cross the line from the difficulties that people have in entering the country in the first place to policies that mean that people who have been in the country for a long time are being plucked out of the communities in which they've been living for a long time, then you really are doing something that is even more devastating in its effects on race relations and the insecurity of the black community than the difficulties they've faced for years in obtaining entry for their families.
Hello, JCWI.
Cases coming into the office show it's now much easier to remove people because the courts have changed the way they interpret the law on illegal entry. And the court rulings have been applied retrospectively to people who came to Britain long before the meaning of the law changed. John Plummer has dealt with many such cases.
Whereas many people think of illegal entry as being those arriving with wet boots on the beaches or people presenting forged passports at the immigration controls, it's now been extended to, for example, include people who entered many years ago, who have stamps on their passports indicating that they're here legally, who might have had no idea that some breach or some deception was practiced on their behalf by somebody else.
It's the consequence of a Home Office policy which has gathered its own momentum and goes on producing new ways of making immigration control even tougher.
Freddie and Linda Albacer and their son Roddy were caught by the new policy. They were visited by immigration officials and told that after 8 years living and working in this country, they were now considered to be illegal entrants.
I was so shocked. I don't know what we are going to do.
Did you feel that it was your fault, that you'd done something wrong?
Well, we don't know because we come here through by the agency and we don't know the British immigration law.
Now the Albacers are packing up their London home. The Home Office has decided they should go. Their mistake 8 years ago was not telling the authorities that they had another child, on the advice of an employment agency doing brisk business at the time in much-needed foreign labour for Britain. Hundreds of Filipinos were caught the same way. So far, the Home Office has reprieved around a half. But despite a year's campaigning, time has now run out for the Albacers.
Well, we are very worried about it, and we cannot sleep in the evening, because we are thinking what we are going to do. And that's what we are always tired, because we are working, and in the evening we cannot sleep well, thinking about the problem.
Linda, what does it feel like to be always on the edge of going? You've had a year of it now.
I feel sad and depressed, I'm just worried. I have no ideas.
What are you worried about?
Because, when we go home, we don't have a house to stay.
Do you have a job to go to?
No, we don't know yet because, as I know in Philippines, the job is difficult to look for. And if you can get a job, the money is not enough.
Freddie and Linda Albesa are worried about their young son, Roddy. He's never been out of England and he doesn't speak the language of the Philippines.
Roddy, he's born here and he got the British passport and he speaks English. And he wants to stay in school all the time because he got plenty friends in there. That's why he is worried to going home to Philippines because he has nobody with him except his brother.
What do you think you're going to miss most?
Home with my friends.
Who are your particular friends?
Daniel, Stephen, Timothy, and Nicholas.
How do you think they'll feel?
I think they'll feel sad.
British Airways flight BA121.
Heathrow Airport, and the Albesas get ready to board the plane which will take Roddy away from his friends. 91 Filipinos have now been removed. The Albesas' departure adds 3 more to that number. But safe on board the plane, they can consider themselves lucky. Under present immigration law, they could have been arrested by immigration officials without a warrant, locked up in prison, and kept there for an indefinite period while their case was considered.
Yeah. Has he been arrested? Yes, I'll be back from prison by 5 o'clock and I'll then be able to see him for certain.
John Plummer specialises in these prison cases for the JCWI.
I believe there's considerable public ignorance about what generally goes on under the name of immigration controls in this country. I don't believe that people, when informed about some of those who are currently languishing in prison indefinitely, would wish them to be there in our name.
Hello, JCWA.
The Joint Council's casework shows that once the Immigration Service has decided that someone like the Albesas entered illegally, they can be locked up with no trial, no right of appeal, and no right to bail. All, says John Plummer, on the authority of a civil servant.
I mean Home Office officials. I don't mean policemen or anyone acting with the authority that one normally accepts and expects policemen to do, but Home Office officials who are acting in accordance with the way this law has deteriorated and can detain a person without taking them to court, without charging them with any offence, and merely have them detained while their case is considered.
Risley Remand Centre in Lancashire. After 3 weeks' detention, a young Iranian student steps to freedom. His lawyer, Sushma Lal, has been fighting to get him out.
These things are happening all the time. The immigration officers are extending their powers, and it's just really up to one officer or the chief immigration officer that they can just put anybody in when they think right.
They phoned me, and just they told me come to airport to have an interview. We want to ask you 2 more questions. And when I went to airport, when I arrived to airport, they told me that we've got a bad news for you and we are going to arrest you and we are going to send you back to Iran.
How long did that interview last?
About 4 minutes, 5 minutes.
Abul Abbasi is now out of detention. His lawyer thinks he's lucky. She applied for a writ of habeas corpus, but it has yet to be decided on. Since the days of Magna Carta, habeas corpus has been a basic principle of British law. It lays down that the authorities must justify detaining anyone who hasn't been charged or let them go. But this law has proved worthless for many people held under the Immigration Act. Habeas corpus doesn't apply. Lord Wilberforce ruled in a recent case,
"It is for the defendant to show that his detention is unlawful."
in other words, the prisoner may now be guilty until proven innocent, and he has no right to bail.
They would, if taken before a court charged with anything but the most grave of criminal offences, almost surely qualify for bail. That does not happen. They are languishing indefinitely.
How long do people tend to spend in prison?
It's often months, and in some cases, indeed, it has been as long as 14 months.
So that somebody could actually be held in prison for 14 months on the say-so of a civil servant?
Precisely.
The people who spend this time in prison may not have avoided immigration controls or used a forged passport or lied to the authorities. 2 test cases have been before the courts. A Filipino one, the Claveria case, opened the way for the authorities to treat as illegal entrants anyone they decided had deceived them, even if they'd been through the proper immigration procedures. The second case went further. Lord Wilberforce ruled in the House of Lords that anyone entering this country
owes a positive duty of candour on all material facts.
So people arriving in Britain are expected both to know what's important and to tell the authorities, even if they're not asked to do so.
Does that mean that you can be locked up for not answering a question you weren't asked?
You can be locked up for not answering a question that you were never asked.
The Home Office says that it's the courts who decide how the law works, and they merely follow court decisions. Ian Martin disagrees.
The extended definition of who is an illegal entrant would never have happened if the Home Office itself had not detained people as illegal entrants and then defended that view before the courts. And the Home Office can't hide behind the courts on that. There was also a stage in that particular story when we tried to dissuade the Home Office privately from continuing to contend in the courts for ever wider definitions of who is an illegal entrant. But despite that, they went ahead and did just that.
It's not only illegal entrants who are threatened with removal. In Leeds, a torchlight procession takes up the case of a young woman from India and her 3-year-old son. Her MP, Sir Keith Joseph, has asked his colleague, Home Office Minister Timothy Raisin, to exercise his right of compassion and allow her to stay. But the Home Office still says she must go.
No way! Deportation, no way!
For 6 years, Jaswinder Kaur has lived and worked in Leeds ever since she was married by arrangement at 16 to a man she thought was a British citizen. This meant she was entitled to live here, but her husband was violent and she left him.
He caused so much trouble. He beat me and he beat our child and finally threw me out. Then my uncle and aunt had to come and fetch me and I had to live with them. I couldn't bear it any longer. I'd had too much of his violence and I couldn't stand it when he beat our baby.
Manjeet was in hospital for a week and Jaswinder's husband was charged with assault and convicted. The Home Office had meanwhile discovered that he wasn't a British citizen but was here illegally and they therefore deported him. But that meant Jaswinder also lost her right to live here. The Home Office says she must return to India, but she's terrified of meeting her husband again.
He's already threatening me with all sorts of things. He got drunk and went to my mother's house in India and caused trouble there. He is determined to pay me back for what happened. I think he wants to kill me. Over there he could do it. In England he was afraid of the police and the law. But in India he won't worry. He can do anything he likes to me there. If I have to go to my mother's, he will be right nearby.
Manjeet is now 3. He was born here, speaks English, and is a British citizen. He has a right to live here. But the Home Office has given his mother a difficult choice: to leave him behind in England or risk taking him into danger in India.
I can't leave my child. How can a child be expected to live without his mother? What else have we got? Manjeet is my life.
Are you frightened of the future?
I'm
very frightened. If I wasn't frightened of going to India, why would I be begging for permission to stay here?
Despite appeals from MPs, the Minister of State decided that he wouldn't use his right of compassion to prevent Jaswinder Kaur's deportation. In a letter to Sir Keith Joseph, he said,
I have carefully considered all Jaswinder Kaur's circumstances, and whilst I can appreciate her wish to remain in this country, I am not persuaded that these circumstances are such as to justify my allowing her to do so.
Jaswinder Kaur came here legally, but but is now considered to be an overstayer. This means she has the right to appeal. She appealed and lost. It's cases like hers that are upsetting Britain's ethnic minorities. This is Oldham, Lancashire. The Asian community here is large, well-established, and integrated into local life. Many are British citizens, yet they're frequently asked to produce evidence of their identity. They've seen friends and relatives, settled here for years, threatened with deportation or removal under the recent Home Office policy, and they're growing increasingly concerned at what they see as a continual challenge to their right to live here. The Oldham Council for Racial Equality is also worried. Janet Garner for the council.
One of the things that really brought this to a head for us at CRE was when I rang up to make an appointment for a Pakistani gentleman in the community, and he was told that he had to bring his passport. And we always ask, why is that? Why do people have to bring the passport? And I was told quite clearly by a young clerk on the phone that they were checking for illegal immigrants.
That was in a benefit office. The group in Oldham included this man, who said he had to produce his passport before his firm would hand over his redundancy money. Another, after 10 years living and working in England, was asked to show his passport before the Department of Employment would register him for professional work. Keith Bradford of the CRE recalls another case.
A young Oldham-born black youngster, aged about 13, riding his bike home one night. The police stopped him, asked him where he'd been. That sort of thing happens. They shone a light in his face, saw that he was coloured, and asked him where he was born. He said he was born in Oldham. They then asked him if he had a passport. They asked him what nationality his father was.
It's something like what's happening in South Africa with the pass laws and so on. And I think a lot of people realize that this is just a further restriction of the rights, basic rights of the people here.
But the complaints aren't just about requests for passports. 2 days after moving house and asking the Department of Health and Social Security for assistance, this family say they were visited by the police.
And there's an early morning, the police investigator came.
They say they too were questioned about their immigration status. But they say only the Housing Office and the Department of Health and Social Security had the new address. Oldham Council for Racial Equality is concerned about the amount of information apparently passed between different government departments and the police. Before joining CRE, Janet Garner was a civil servant in the Department of Employment.
Whilst I was there, a large number of memos were always being circulating with instructions for staff on. And one of them was just this, that if we were suspicious about a passport, that the supervisor was then to ring a certain section of the police. I'm not sure now whether it was the local police or something at national level, but that was what was to be done. I think that ought to be known to the public, so they know that when they're giving this kind of information to the benefit officers, that it isn't in confidence, it can be passed on to the police.
Documents from the Department of Health and Social Security show that there too information on ethnic minorities is passed on. In one regional circular on national insurance, officers are instructed to pass on information on the same day the passport is checked.
So that on follow-up, the Immigration Service's ability to locate an applicant is maximised.
But the Department of Health and Social Security Code on Disclosure says that information
is not generally available to other government departments and should not normally be disclosed to them.
The code makes exceptions and also takes precautions.
This department should not be revealed as the original source of information.
Manchester Law Centre has had first-hand experience of cases involving the exchange of information between government departments. One of their clients is Nasira Begum. She was threatened with deportation and then refused the right either to work or to claim benefit. Her lawyer, Steve Cohen, appealed to a tribunal.
Although the DHSS claimed that they had no power to give Nasira money, they said that anyone in her situation, if they were prepared to go back to Pakistan to renounce their immigration appeal rights, they would then subsidise them up to the time they returned to Pakistan. The DHSS and the Home Office are saying we're prepared to starve out anyone who wants to stay and file their immigration case here, but if they're prepared to go back, then we'll subsidise them until they go back.
Did Nasira have a legal right of appeal against the immigration decision?
Of course she had a legal right of appeal and she won her case.
Nasira may have won her case, but the Home Office had determined she should go and appealed against the adjudicator's decision.
For me, very, very big shock, like a bombshell. I was very, very pleased I had won the case and allowed to stay here peacefully. But Not yet.
Ian Martin is disturbed by current Home Office policy and by the powers they now hold.
It would be regarded as a scandal in any other area if people were effectively regarded as guilty unless they could be proved to be innocent, rather than regarded as innocent until they were proved guilty. If people in any other way could be detained without there having been any kind of a hearing, or if in any other field there was no limit to the period of detention and people were not able to apply formally for bail. Everyone would call that a scandal in any other area. Unfortunately, when it affects certain people in the black community, it doesn't receive the kind of indignation that it would receive on the front page of popular newspapers if it were happening to white people in this community, or even more if it were happening to white people in other countries.
Last year, nearly 700 people were detained under the Immigration Act. More than 250 deportation orders were signed without court appearances, and nearly 1,000 people were removed from Britain. The Minister of State at the Home Office responsible for immigration is Timothy Raisin.
Those who work in the immigration field say that the number of people removed from Britain has increased by 50% in the past 2 years. Why is that?
I think it's partly to do with the fact that the people concerned, the immigration service and the police, are carrying out their job efficiently. It's partly due to the fact that in the realm of illegal entry, there are people being removed as a result of court decisions who might not have been removed in earlier times.
Are you not in a situation today where you agree to the removal or deportation of someone in circumstances where 2-3 years ago, before certain decisions performed by the courts, that course would not have been followed?
Yes, I think that may be true. But there again, I mean, we have to have regard to what the law is as it is declared by the Supreme Court.
Can it be fair, though, for a civil servant to call someone for an interview and after a conversation lasting a few minutes to have that person put in prison, possibly indefinitely, without a right to appear before a court or a right to bail, and with no right of appeal, and eventually to have that person put on a plane out of Britain?
Well, you're talking now about illegal entrance rather than overstairs. There's, I think, been for quite a long time some argument about the appeal rights of illegal entrance, which is really, and the right to bail. And as no doubt you know, the Home Office have just published a discussion document in which we do raise the question of whether we shouldn't have a right of appeal in this country as opposed to the right of appeal from overseas, and also a bail provision attached to it. I think for quite a while people have wondered whether this is not a weakness in the present Immigration Act. And as I say, that is something where we've indicated our belief that this is something that has to be looked at, and we have invited people to make representations.
But DHSS staff are under confidential instructions to pass on suspicions about immigrants to the Home Office, having studied their passports and their documentation. Isn't that indirect snooping by the Home Office into immigrants' affairs?
Well, I don't think we get very much information from that sort of source. There's always been a question, I suppose, about how far government departments pass on information to other government departments, not only in this field, but generally. I would have thought that the thing that struck people, by and large, was how little information is passed between government departments.
But don't immigrants have the right, the same as other people, to believe that when they deal with a government department, they deal in confidence, that that information is not going to be used against them by another government department?
There's really a curious lack of rules. I mean, one of the arguments about law in the field of privacy and so on is that these things should perhaps be more clearly defined than they have been.
Finally, did the Minister believe that the Home Office policies were carried out in a compassionate way?
We, after all, have to uphold the law. The country has passed immigration laws. The country has passed, through Parliament, acts which say such and such people are allowed to come in, such and such people can remain here, such and such people are entitled to remove. And it is our job, therefore, to uphold the law, but we try to do so in a way which is as compassionate as is possible under those circumstances.
Unless the Minister changes his mind, Jaswinder Kaur and her son Manjeet will return to India under husband's threats of violence. Nasira Begum must wait another month to see if the Home Office will win their case and deport her to Pakistan. And 57 Filipinos are still threatened with removal. But for one 7-year-old boy, a British citizen, and his parents, all hope of remaining in Britain has gone.